This is a video on making an inductor for a make and break engine. What I think will work quite nicely is getting a microwave oven transformer, and you can see it here. They're usually about 700 VA, 700 volt amps. So here you can see the primary winding, and sort of right here are the connections. That's the 110 volts. Now in European countries that might be 220, but you can see that the winding is fairly substantial wire. So it's good for a couple of amps, that's for sure. And then this green part here is the secondary winding. That's about 2000 volts or 2200 volts. And the way this transformer is put together, you can see that right here the laminations are separated, and they have been welded shut with this weld right along here. And so what I have done is to take a hacksaw and very carefully saw through that weld, but very carefully, not damaging the primary winding, because that's what you want. And the way I do it is to start the saw cut here, and then have another saw cut here, and then eventually join the two, and just keep carefully going back and forth slowly on either side, because there's a similar weld on the other side. And then once we have a pocket deep enough, what I did was to take a cold chisel, steel chisel like that, and just give it a tap, and then you'll see a little wee tiny crack opening up. That means you've gone deep enough, and you can take the winding or the laminations apart. And here you can see, I believe, where I've taken a transformer apart, and I'm trying to get the light here. You can see my saw cut right across there. There's a little bit of a groove, and you can see the start of the cut. And eventually you get that off, and be quite careful of it so that it doesn't come apart. And eventually what you'll have to try and do is to get that secondary winding off or out. And what I did was I used two opposing wedges rather than just one wedge. You have two opposing wedges, and what that means is that the pressure is more or less uniform, and you tap them in from both sides, and what it will do is raise it. And so you've got to watch out not to damage the primary winding. So you want to be really careful. So in this case, for example, I would hold this one because it's resting on the primary winding, and I would tap this one to give it upward pressure on the secondary winding, because I don't really care too much about the secondary winding. So eventually you get it off, and here's what the secondary winding looks like. If you're careful, you can get it off. It might be useful for other things later, but for this project it's really not needed. And so once you have it off, you very carefully then get that primary winding off, and that's what the primary winding looks like. And then what you do is you clean out all the stuff in here. Oh, there's varnish and tape and that kind of stuff, and usually there's two small laminations. These are steel parts that are jammed in above the primary winding. So you just tap those out very carefully. So once you've got everything cleaned out, what you can do is put the primary winding back in there, and then remembering how the top lamination was placed, it was one way or the other. In this case it was like that. And then what I do is I clamp it and then weld it here with a small welder that I've got. And what you're doing is basically completing the magnetic circuit all around. So then you end up with something that looks like this. It's not welded, but and what you'll find that if you connect this to the make and break circuit, you'll get a wonderful spark. So that's what I would suggest, and usually you can get these transformers for nothing if you just look for a microwave oven that's been thrown out in the garbage. You get them for cheap, like zero. So that's one of the things I would recommend if you want an inductor for a make and break type ignition on a old engine, be it either a marine engine or a stationary engine. The wires usually are big enough to take a couple of amps of current. I would, be careful. You just watch it when you're trying to. Don't short them for a long time because clearly they would melt. But normally the cycle is about, I don't know, 1/10 of a second on and most of the second off. So there you have it. I tried it out using this battery, and it gives you a nice big fat blue spark. So good enough for ignition, that's for sure.